Hello, my name is Dr. Javier Wallace, and I'm the project lead for From Stephen to CV Tobacco, Race, and Duke Men's Basketball Program. I decided to initiate this program because when I arrived here to Durham and Duke in particular, I noticed that there was a silence surrounding the narrative of two important individuals in the state and the institution's history, one being Stephen Slade, who's accredited to discovering brightleaf tobacco, and the other being Dr. Claudius Claiborne, who is the first Black student athlete at Duke University. I wasn't satisfied in how I heard their narratives being narrated. And I noticed that there was some connections in their story that really drew us to the university. So with that, with this project, with great students and great graduate assistants, we move forward to reconstruct these narratives and tell a story that is more inclusive and will hopefully push the university and its supporters to recognize the grand contributions of these great individuals and the legacies they've left with us today. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy.
Hello, my name is Sophia Hanani. I am a rising junior undergraduate student, and I am one of the undergraduate researchers on this project, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Henry. I'm a rising sophomore. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am also one of the undergraduate researchers on this project.
Okay. And with that, we'd like to start with giving some acknowledgements both to Dr. Claudius Claiborne, who helped us a lot in this project and, did an oral interview with us. And we'd also like to acknowledge both Duke's Black community and Durham's Black community for being such a prominent part of this project. And without further ado, let's get started. So we would like to examine the relationship between Stephen Slade and C.B. Claiborne and the historical legacies that come from this relationship. So starting with Stephen Slade is most well known for being an enslaved Black man in the 19th century who accidentally discovered brightleaf tobacco. Now, when we examined the truth behind this narrative and visited places like the Duke homestead, what we realized is that this narrative erases how much expertise and skill has gone into the development of brightleaf tobacco. It took decades for enslaved Black men and women to carefully curate the strain that would go on to become such a multi-million-dollar cash crop for the Piedmont region. And this profit, we know, creates wealth not only for white enslavers like Abijah Slade, Stephen Slade's enslaver, but also for American corporations such as the Duke-owned American Tobacco Corporation in Durham and corporations within Danville, Virginia, that create an economic center for producing and selling brightleaf tobacco. And the narratives around Stephen Slade's accidental discovery promote paternalistic ideas such as an accidental discovery by a Black man and a white man who needs to use his skill and his expertise to develop this into a profitable crop. Danville is one of the two main cities we are focusing on, and it became a center for tobacco production after the creation of brightleaf tobacco. And Danville is where C.B. Claiborne was born in 1947. And we know from speaking with him that tobacco played a very large role in his life. Not only was his family part of the tobacco economy, but the sale and production of tobacco was a prominent part of his life, and he experienced it living in Danville. The Black community in Danville was largely tied to working in the tobacco industry. And this community fostered C.B. Claiborne from a child and promoted education and academia in his life. And it was these people, both from his family as well as mentors at his high school, that really encouraged him to seek higher education and be successful academically.
Sports played a major role in Claudius's life as a kid. When it came to tennis, a local Black coach named Jack Caldwell hired him and a friend to paint Danville's segregated all-white courts. But later on, Claudius and his friend would, in an act of civil disobedience, desegregate those same public tennis courts. Baseball was originally his greatest athletic passion, and because of racist segregation at that time, he spent a lot of time with baseball icons such as Felipe Alou and Willie McCovey because they were boarders at his aunt's home. Basketball later on became the biggest sport for him, and he started it by attending a tryout led by Ed Sherrill, who was a former player under the venerated coach Big House Gaines at Winston-Salem State. In high school, he would lead the Lions to a championship game, and the team was coached by Hank Allen, who was a mentor for the young student athlete.
Coach Hank Allen also helped Claiborne later on in his high school career by negotiating a deal with Duke's director of admissions to allow Claiborne into Duke's undergraduate class as not only a student, but as a basketball player. In 1965, Duke had only been integrated with a couple of Black students 2 years prior, and they had never had a Black student athlete before. As a part of this deal negotiated between just the two of them, Claiborne did not receive an athletic scholarship. However, his coach, Hank Allen, still encouraged him to take this deal and attend Duke. Now, while Claiborne was at Duke, he noticed that Duke and Durham had very similar connections in terms of tobacco. Similarly to Danville, Durham had been transformed by Brightleaf Tobacco as the Dukes owned many profitable tobacco companies and warehouses that really influenced the city.
Now, we can talk a little bit more about the connection between race and basketball, which was really large during the time, specifically because a lot of recognizable figures in the push for integration were Black athletes and coaches. But while sports was segregated, Black players and coaches continued to innovate in their respective games, most notably John McClendon, whose pioneering fast breaks can still be seen in modern basketball. And there were still double standards for Black players at this time too, because even though these innovations were coming from HBCUs, Black coaches, Black players, they were derided for the same things that white players would later copy them for. When Claudius first played at Duke, fans ridiculed him for how he dribbled the ball. But when white players did the same thing, most notably Pete Maravich, and later on in Claudius' senior year, Dick DiVenzio, they were praised. There was another double standard that Black players were held to at this time when Duke integrated its school and its sports team far later than many other schools, using the justification that Black student athletes didn't want to come to the South and that they didn't meet the admissions requirements for their school. However, we know that these statements can be troubled because of what we know about Claiborne and because of what we know about HBCUs and how Black athletes have attended them for decades before. So for Claudius coming to play in Duke, he faced the harsh reality of racism and segregation. He would have been mocked by older fans, and at Duke games, it was very common to see hallmarks of the Confederate flag and hear the song Dixie. And at away games, all Black players faced racial abuse and violence. Claudius was no exception. And during one incident in his freshman year, after Claudius responded to a racist incident, he had to hide behind his own coach because of the white crowd, which was trying to find him. And later on in his freshman year, he would have been barred from the Hope Valley Country Club, which was where the basketball team held their end of the year banquet. And while being a student at Duke, Claudius was in the midst of the civil rights movement. And being a Black student at Duke meant more to him than being just an athlete. He was a member of the Afro-American Society and participated in activism within Durham. After Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968, he gave a speech at the subsequent march, stating that having grown up in Danville, where there were a lot of people worrying about taking down those barriers, he had to think about the same things too. During his senior year, Claudius was supposed to have a breakout year. He went to New York to train to become a better athlete, and he started off the year playing more minutes and scoring more points and scoring more assists. But when Claudius wanted to wear his hair out in an afro, Coach Bubis told him that he would be benched if he did not cut it. And because Claudius saw his afro as an essential part of his identity, he refused to cut it and was subsequently given less minutes. During the week of February 13th, with protests on campuses across the nation demanding a more equitable experience for Black students, Claiborne took part in the Allen Building takeover. Because of this, he missed games, and the media derided him for missing games. However, later on, Claudius would return back to the team, where he would finish up his playing days and later continue his education.
What we saw learning about both Stephen Slade's experience with Brightleaf Tobacco and CB's experience at Duke is that there was a legacy of exploitation and subsequent profit from these Black creatives and intellects, and then the white institutions that had power over them. What we saw at Duke was that Claudius was under intense pressure from Duke University and the athletic program to submit to racist segregationist policies and double standards that Black players at the time faced. However, coming from Danville, Virginia, resistance was a critical part of how Claiborne was raised. And we know that he continued to wear his hair in an afro, organize with other Black students, and participate in protests for racial justice on campus. Activism was an important part of his identity, and he did not allow the racism from this white institution to limit what he wanted to do during his undergraduate year. However, he was condemned by the university and the white public for this. Many narratives at the time called Claiborne lucky to play for Duke, and they framed him as a recipient of Duke's goodwill and acceptance. However, we know that these narratives erase what he contributed to the athletic program and what he contributed to the university in general. The truth is that while at Duke, Claiborne benefited the university extremely. There was a lot of criticism that was going on in terms of Duke men's basketball team not racially integrating, and Claiborne served as an answer for this. Stephen Slade and Claudius Claiborne are both representative of the Black community in the Piedmont area that benefited white institutions they were connected to with their intellect, skill, and expertise. And this relationship inevitably led to profit for these white institutions.